A wounded bear begged me for help, leading me to her drowning cub. Now, as I fight to save them both, a deeper mystery unfolds by the river's edge. The sun hung low in the sky, painting the wilderness with hues of orange and gold as I trudged along, my fishing basket dangling empty at my side. It had been a long, fruitless day by the river, hours of casting lines into the chilly water, only to reel in nothing but disappointment. My shoulders slumped and my legs felt heavy, each step a reminder of the ache settling deep into my muscles. The cold had seeped through my boots, numbing my toes, and all I could think about was getting back to my cabin. I pictured the crackling fire waiting for me, its warmth wrapping around me like a blanket, and my worn armchair where I could sink in and forget this frustrating day ever happened. Usually I stuck to the well-worn path home, a winding trail that hugged the riverbank and offered a clear, easy walk. But tonight, exhaustion clouded my judgment. I veered off toward a shortcut, a dense thicket of bushes I'd avoided before. The tangled branches loomed ahead, their thorny arms reaching out as if to warn me away. I hesitated for a moment, peering into the shadowy mass, but the promise of a quicker route won out. With a deep breath, I pushed into the thicket, ducking under low-hanging limbs and shoving aside prickly vines that snagged at my jacket. The sharp tips scratched my arms and tugged at my hair, leaving tiny stings on my skin. I winced, but kept going, too tired to care about the discomfort. My mind drifted, imagining the steam rising from a hot shower, the way it would melt the day's tension from my body. The bushes grew thicker, their rustling filling the quiet air as I forced my way through. Twigs snapped under my boots, and the scent of damp earth and pine hung heavy around me. I could hear my own breathing, quick and uneven, as I battled the undergrowth. Just when I thought I'd made a mistake, the last branch gave way with a sharp crack, springing back as I stumbled out into a small clearing. I straightened up, brushing leaves from my sleeves, and that's when the world seemed to grind to a halt. Not 20 feet away stood a black bear, its hulking form framed by the fading light. Its fur shimmered faintly, catching the last rays of the sun, and its sheer size made my breath catch in my throat. My heart thudded hard against my ribs, a wild rhythm that drowned out the sounds of the forest. I'd seen bears before, sure. Living out here, you couldn't avoid them, but never this close, never like this. Our eyes locked, and in that instant, I felt smaller than I ever had, a speck against the raw power of nature staring me down. Instinct kicked in, years of outdoor know-how flooding my mind. I knew the rules: don't run, don't look weak. My hands trembled as I raised them slowly above my head, trying to make myself look bigger, more imposing. The fishing basket clattered against my hip, and my gear jingled faintly, a shaky soundtrack to my silent plea that this wouldn't be the end. I stood there, rooted to the spot, waiting for the bear to react, expecting a growl, a lunge, anything to signal danger. My pulse raced, and a cold sweat prickled along my spine as I fought the urge to bolt. But the bear didn't charge. It didn't even bare its teeth. Instead, it let out a sound that cut through my fear like a knife, a low, mournful whine that seemed to rise from somewhere deep inside its chest. The noise wasn't threatening, it was pained, almost human in its desperation. My arms faltered, dropping an inch as confusion replaced some of the panic. This wasn't the reaction I'd braced for. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. I squinted in the dimming light, taking a closer look. The bear's fur, which I'd first thought sleek and glossy, was matted in clumps, streaked with dirt and something darker. Blood, I realized with a jolt. Dark patches stained its side, glistening wetly against the black coat. The bear shifted, and I noticed how it held its right front paw off the ground, barely letting it touch the earth. Each movement seemed to cost it effort, its massive frame trembling slightly as it stood there, watching me. A memory flashed through my mind, sharp and sudden. Earlier that day, while I'd been casting my line near a bend in the river, I'd caught sight of a mother bear and her cub on the opposite bank. They'd been a peaceful pair, the cub tumbling playfully while the mother dipped her muzzle into the water to drink. I'd watched them for a moment, admiring their quiet grace, before turning back to my fishing. Now, staring at this injured bear, the pieces clicked into place. The size, the coloring, it had to be her. But if this was the mother, where was her cub? A cold dread settled in my gut, heavy and twisting. The mother bear took a halting step toward me, her head low, and let out another whimper that hit me like a punch. Her eyes, deep brown and startlingly clear, held mine with an intensity that made my skin prickle. There was no aggression there, no wild fury, only a raw, pleading need. My mind raced, spinning through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Had the cub been hurt? Lost? Worse? Time seemed to slow, the forest falling silent around us. I noticed every detail, the way her chest heaved with each ragged breath, the slight quiver in her injured leg, the glint of desperation in her gaze. It was as if the world had narrowed to just the two of us, human and bear, bound by something I couldn't name. A connection sparked, a primal understanding that cut through the divide between us. She wasn't here to hurt me, she was asking for help. Without thinking, I took a step back, not to escape, but to beckon her. My movements were slow, deliberate, my eyes never leaving hers. To my shock, she followed, dragging her wounded paw as she limped after me. My heart hammered, but now it wasn't just fear driving it, it was purpose. I didn't know how or why, but I knew where we needed to go. The river. Whatever had happened, the answer lay there. I turned and started running, my boots pounding the soft earth as I wove through the trees. The exhaustion that had weighed me down minutes ago vanished, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. Behind me, I heard the bear's labored breathing, the uneven thud of her paws as she struggled to keep up. The sound urged me faster, my legs pumping despite the burn in my muscles. I darted around gnarled roots and ducked under low branches, the forest blurring past in a mix of shadow and twilight. The air grew cooler as we neared the river, the faint roar of water cutting through the stillness. Long shadows stretched across our path, cast by the last slivers of daylight, filtering through the canopy. My breath came in sharp bursts, fogging in the chilly air, but I didn't slow down. The bear's presence behind me felt surreal, a wild creature trusting me, following me, depending on me. The weight of that trust pressed against my chest, heavier than the run itself. The ground sloped downward and the trees began to thin, giving way to the rocky stretch of the riverbank. I burst out of the forest, skidding to a stop as the water came into view, wide, wild, and churning under the dusky sky. My eyes scanned the scene, searching for the cub, for any sign of what had brought us here. The mother bear stumbled out behind me, her breathing harsh and ragged, and I turned to her, catching that same pleading look in her eyes. The river stretched before us, its surface rippling with currents that glinted in the low light. I took a step closer, the damp pebbles crunching under my boots, and that's when I saw it, a small, dark shape struggling against the rocks near the far bank. The cub. My stomach lurched as I realized it was slipping, its tiny paws scrabbling for a hold as the water tugged at its body. The mother bear let out a cry, sharp and anguished, and I didn't hesitate. I yanked off my jacket, tying a rope from my fishing gear around my waist and securing it to a sturdy tree. The icy water hit me like a slap as I waded in, then dove, the cold piercing my skin like needles. The current grabbed at me, pulling hard, but I kicked against it, my arms slicing through the waves. From the shore, the mother's desperate whimpers followed me, a haunting echo over the river's roar. The cub was ahead, its small form bobbing as it fought to stay above water. My Navy SEAL training surged to the surface, hours spent in freezing oceans, battling waves, staying calm under pressure. I focused on that now, blocking out the chill seeping into my bones. The rope trailed behind me, taut against the current, my lifeline back to shore. I swam harder, each stroke a battle, my eyes locked on the cub's weakening struggles. 20 feet away, then 15, then 10. I was closing in, my lungs burning as I pushed against the river's force. The cub's head dipped lower, its paws slipping on the slick rocks. I was almost there when a submerged log rammed into my side, knocking the air from me. I gasped, shoving off it, using the momentum to propel myself closer. Just as I reached out, the cub's grip failed, and it vanished beneath the waves. My heart stopped. I sucked in a breath and dove, the murky water swallowing me whole. It stung my eyes, blurring everything, but I forced them open, groping through the dark. The current spun me, slamming me against rocks, but I kept searching, my hands sweeping frantically. My chest tightened, air running low, until, there, my fingers brushed something soft. I grabbed it, clutching the cub's limp body, and kicked upward with everything I had. We broke the surface and I coughed, gulping air as I held the cub tight. It wasn't moving, its wet fur plastered against its small frame. I turned back, fighting the current with one arm, the rope pulling taut around my waist. The mother's cries grew louder, more urgent as I battled my way to shore, the water dragging at us both. Finally, my boots scraped the riverbed. I staggered out, collapsing onto the rocky bank, the cub cradled in my arms. My chest heaved, water dripping from my hair as I caught my breath. The mother bear lumbered over, and I tensed, ready for anything. But she didn't attack. She nosed her cub gently, then, to my astonishment, placed it back at my feet. Her eyes met mine, trusting, desperate, and I knew what she wanted. I knelt beside the cub, my hands shaking from cold and exertion. I'd learned CPR in training, but this was different. Still, I had to try. I pressed its tiny chest, gentle but firm, counting the compressions in my head. Between sets, I breathed into its mouth, praying it wasn't too late. The mother watched, her own breath shallow, her body trembling from her wounds. Time stretched on, my arms aching, until, at last, the cub twitched. A cough, then water sputtered out, and its eyes flickered open, drawing a weak, shaky breath. Relief crashed over me like a wave. The cub's first shaky breath sent a rush of warmth through me, a fleeting moment of triumph that lit up the growing dusk. I sat back on my heels, my hands trembling from the effort, watching as its tiny chest rose and fell. Water glistened on its black fur, and its eyes, still dazed, blinked slowly against the fading light. The sound of that small inhale felt like a victory, a fragile thread of life pulled back from the river's grip. But the joy didn't last long. Beside me, the mother bear swayed, her massive frame unsteady on the rocky shore. Her deep brown eyes, so sharp with trust just moments ago, dulled as her strength faltered. Before I could react, she crumpled to the ground with a heavy thud that vibrated through the pebbles beneath my knees. My heart sank, a cold weight settling in my chest. The cub, still weak and wobbly, let out a pitiful whimper and crawled to her side. Its tiny nose nudged her face, pushing against her matted fur, but she barely stirred. Her breathing came in shallow, uneven gasps, each one a struggle that made her whole body shudder. I scrambled closer, my own exhaustion forgotten as I took in the damage. The gashes I'd glimpsed earlier weren't just scratches. They were deep, angry cuts slicing through her thick coat, crusted with blood and dirt. More wounds hid beneath her fur, jagged tears that told a story of a desperate fight. She must have battled the river's brutal current, maybe sharp rocks or fallen branches, all to save her cub. The fact that she'd made it to me, injured and bleeding, was a miracle I couldn't wrap my head around. The cub's cries grew sharper, a high-pitched keening that clawed at my soul. It pressed itself against her, small paws pawing at her side as if it could wake her up. I reached out, hesitant, my hand hovering over her fur. Her warmth still radiated, but it was fading, slipping away with each labored breath. I felt useless, my hands empty of anything that could fix this. The river roared behind us, its relentless rush a cruel reminder of what we'd just escaped, and the forest around us stood silent, indifferent to the scene unfolding on its edge. Despair tightened my throat, but then, a faint rumble broke through the stillness. My head snapped up, ears straining, an engine, distant but growing louder. Hope flickered, fragile but fierce. I staggered to my feet, ignoring the ache in my legs, and cupped my hands around my mouth. "Help! Over here!" I shouted, my voice hoarse and raw. I yelled again and again, pouring every ounce of strength into the sound, praying it would carry over the river's din. The rumble grew closer, a low growl cutting through the trees, and suddenly a Forest Service truck burst into view, its tires crunching over twigs and leaves as it skidded to a stop near the bank. 2 rangers leaped out, followed by a woman in a vet's jacket, her arms loaded with medical gear. Relief washed over me, so strong my knees nearly buckled. They moved fast, boots pounding the ground as they closed the distance. One ranger, a tall guy with a scruffy beard, shouted something about a call. Hikers on the far bank had seen me dive into the river and flagged them down. I stepped back, giving them space as the vet knelt beside the mother bear, her hands swift and sure. She checked the wounds, muttering under her breath, while the rangers unfolded a large crate nearby. I watched, heart in my throat, as they cleaned the gashes with antiseptic, bandaged what they could, and slid a needle into her flank. Antibiotics, I figured. Maybe something for the pain. The cub stayed close, its whimpers softening as the vet worked. They handled it gently, wrapping it in a blanket before lifting both bears into the crate. The mother's eyes flickered open for a moment, unfocused but alive, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The second ranger, a woman with kind eyes and a braid poking out from under her cap, approached me. "Name's Sarah," she said, her voice steady. "We'll get them to the wildlife hospital. You need a ride?" I nodded, too drained to argue, and climbed into the truck's cab. My clothes clung to me, soaked and heavy, but the warmth of the heater felt like a lifeline as we rattled back toward my cabin. Sleep didn't come easy that night. The adrenaline faded, leaving me restless, replaying every moment by the river, the cub's limp body, the mother's collapse, the truck's timely roar. By morning, my muscles screamed in protest, stiff from the cold and strain, but I couldn't stay away. I drove to the wildlife hospital, a low building tucked into the woods, its walls lined with photos of rescued animals. A staff member led me to an observation room, a glass window separating me from the bear's pen. The cub was there, curled up beside its mother, its small frame still fragile but moving. It nuzzled her, seeking comfort, and she shifted slightly, acknowledging its presence despite her own weakness. The vet met me there, her face lined with quiet determination. She explained the mother's condition: severe infection from the wounds, blood loss, exhaustion. "She's a fighter," she said, glancing at the pair. "That cub's keeping her going." I nodded, watching as the cub nosed at her fur, its tiny tongue flicking out to groom her. Over the next few weeks, I became a regular visitor, drawn back by a pull I couldn't name. Each trip showed progress. The cub grew stronger, its movements less shaky, its eyes brighter with each passing day. It started to play, batting at a rubber ball the staff had left, tumbling over itself in clumsy bursts of energy. The mother's recovery was slower, a battle fought in small victories. Her wounds closed, leaving pink scars beneath her fur, and the infection eased under a steady stream of meds. She'd lift her head when I arrived, her gaze steady, as if she recognized me through the glass. The staff kept them together, understanding the bond that tethered them. "She's healing for him," one nurse told me, nodding at the cub as it clambered over its mother's paws. I'd stand there, hands in my pockets, marveling at their resilience, at the way love, or whatever you'd call it in the wild, held them together. Finally, after weeks that stretched like months, the call came. They were ready for release. I joined the team at the site, a quiet stretch of forest near the river, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The crate sat on the ground, its door latched, and my pulse quickened as Sarah unhooked it. The mother bear emerged first, slow and deliberate, her head swinging to take in the trees. Her scars caught the light, a map of her ordeal etched into her fur. She paused, sniffing the air, then glanced back at the crate. The cub tumbled out after her, bolder now, its small legs carrying it forward with newfound confidence. They stood together for a moment, a pair against the vastness of the wild, then moved off, melting into the undergrowth with a grace that hid the struggle they'd endured. I figured that was it, a chapter closed, but the forest had other ideas. Weeks later, I was back at my usual fishing spot, the river glinting under a pale sun. My line bobbed in the water, and I was lost in the rhythm of casting when a rustle snapped me alert. I turned, and there they were, the mother bear stepping from the bushes, her fur thicker now, her scars fainter but still there. The cub trailed her, bigger and bouncier, its eyes darting to me with curiosity. They didn't approach, settling instead at a safe distance, watching me with a quiet acknowledgement. From then on, it became a pattern. I'd fish, and they'd appear, shadows among the trees. The mother would sit sometimes, her gaze fixed on the river's bend where it all went down, like she was replaying it in her mind. The cub would romp nearby, chasing leaves or splashing at the water's edge, its playful yips carrying over the breeze. We kept our space, a respectful boundary. But there was something there, a thread tying us together across that gap between man and beast. Those moments by the river turned into something I couldn't shake. I'd sit on a fallen log, pole in hand, and think about it all. How she'd found me, limping and bleeding, trusting me with her cub's life. How that trust had pulled us through, linking us in a way I'd never expected. It wasn't just about the rescue anymore. It was the silent understanding that grew from it, the way we'd shared something bigger than ourselves. The river flowed on, steady and unchanging, but it carried a story now, one of courage, care, and a bond forged in the wild that I'd carry with me always. Thank you for watching. If you liked the story, feel free to comment, like, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.